I hope you're not on a bus going through the borders at high speed as Anna Sarwar just was.
Well, I don't have a bus, sadly. I'm just being touring around the country in the back of a car. So I don't have a bus. The SNP and Labour do. The Conservatives are dedicating our resources more to the campaigns and actually engaging with voters.
Oh, you slipped that one in beautifully. Let's move on to the substance. The polls at the moment forecast you to lose 5 seats, the Tories to lose 5 seats in these Holyrood elections, down from 30 to 25. I know not a vote has been cast. I know you're going to say, let's wait for the voters to make their decision, which indeed we all will. But you are down in the polls from 2016, and why do you think that is?
Well, we're actually ahead of where we were at this stage of the 2016 election campaign in terms of the polling, and the polling also shows this election is on a knife edge. I don't want this outcome, but at the moment it looks like the SNP could get a majority if the polls remain the same, but they also show that the only party that can challenge the SNP, that can stop them getting that majority, like we did in 2016, is the Scottish Conservatives. So if pro-UK, anti-referendum voters in Scotland want to stop that SNP majority, they can back the Scottish Conservatives on the Peach party list vote, and we can stop a majority, stop another independence referendum, and get all our focus on recovery, which is what people want the next Parliament to be talking about, to be discussing, debating, and delivering on.
And for listeners listening to what you just said, they will say, well, there are a lot of different parties I could vote for that isn't the SNP to stop them. Why mathematically or cephalogically is it your argument that only the Tories, a vote for the Tories, would do that?
Because the Scottish Labour Party have lost votes and seats at every election in Scotland since 1999, when the Scottish Parliament was reconvened, and since the 2016, the last Scottish elections, at every election since then, for local government, for Westminster, the Scottish Conservatives have been the second place party. So we are the strongest challengers to the SNP. We are the party that stopped that referendum and SNP majority 5 years ago, and can do so again at this election if people who have maybe never thought about voting Conservative before, don't see themselves as natural Conservatives, but know they don't want the division of another independence referendum and a Parliament that can't focus on the big issues such as our recovery and rebuilding. If they unite behind the Scottish Conservatives on that Peach party list ballot paper, we can get a Parliament focused on our recovery.
Okay. You are still not where you should be in these polling, in the projections in this race, if you don't mind me saying to you. You're a new leader. It's got to be dispiriting that that's not having an electoral effect. And there's supposed to be a vaccine bounce going on for the Tories. Clearly, if there is one in Scotland, without the vaccine rollout, you'd be even further behind than where you are now.
Well, I think you're right, Tom, not to predict any outcome of this election before the votes are counted. Of course, many have already been cast here in Scotland with a lot of postal ballots, but there's a big election in just over 4 days' time, as you say, when people have a choice. And the choice here in Scotland is another term with an SNP government. If they get a majority, we know they'll take their eye off the ball again. We can stop that majority and really start focusing on protecting people's jobs, supporting businesses, investing in education, delivering for the NHS, which has done so much for us over the last year in this pandemic. But we've got to make sure we catch up on all the delayed appointments and treatments and operations. This is where the focus has to be in Holyrood over the next 5 years, not with Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond, Patrick Harvie and all the nationalist demands for another referendum.
Do you think Brexit has taken some support off the Tories in Scotland? I mean, you were a Remain voter. Brexit has happened now, but it's not exactly what Scottish fishermen had in mind, is it, to not be able to sell their catch into Europe any longer?
Well, there are issues with Scottish fishermen, and I've been dealing with them both as a local MP and continuing to engage with them throughout this election as leader of the Scottish Conservatives. But I think people do see Brexit as something that has happened. But the next 5 years is about uniting our country again. We've come through this pandemic together, and I want to continue that unity to ensure that we deliver for fishing communities in every community across Scotland. But we won't get that recovery in the northeast of Scotland or for our fishing communities if we don't have a parliament that's focused on recovery.
Independence and a second referendum is a massive issue on the ballot paper, both your opposition to it, Nicola Sturgeon's being in favour of it. So what should the British government say, the Westminster government say, on May the 7th, if Nicola Sturgeon wins a majority for independence, either alone or with the Greens in support, and asks the UK government to agree a referendum once the pandemic is over?
Well, the UK government have been clear that the next 5 years is all about focusing on issues that matter in Scotland right now. It shouldn't be about trying to divide families and communities all over again. But of course, the SNP have made it clear during this campaign and before that they would simply ignore what the UK government says and go ahead with a wildcat illegal referendum. Nicola Sturgeon has set up a group within the SNP to deliver an 11-point plan. That plan says they will go ahead regardless, and one of our own MPs said just last week that the Nationalists will hold a consultative referendum if they get a majority. And all that takes our focus away on where it really should be. And it's typical that the Nationalists put their party priorities ahead of the country's priorities.
So, in your view, the next 5 years is no time to hold a second independence referendum because you're rebuilding?
I never want another second independence referendum. I am a Conservative and Unionist. I believe in just how important the union of the United Kingdom has been to Scotland during this pandemic.
Yeah,
and
that's very clear. Douglas Ross, that's
before.
very clear. The question is, though, what should the UK government do when Nicola Sturgeon inevitably says we should now hold one? Do you just say now is not the time? Do you say the next 5 years is not the time? Or do you say never is the time?
Well, the UK government has been clear, the Prime Minister has been clear. He does not want Scotland divided again with another independence referendum, particularly when we should be absolutely laser focused on our recovery.
So does he rule it out?
Unemployment here in Scotland.
He can rule it out, can't he? This is what everyone knows what they want or don't want. We heard that a lot. What we haven't heard the Conservative Party say recently is we will not allow a second independence referendum. And you're not prepared to say that either.
Well, absolutely. I am saying that. I never want another independence referendum. We should not have that as the dominating factor in this election or indeed in the next Parliament elected on Thursday. But I've also explained, Tom, the real risk here is the SNP ignore that. They don't take anything from the UK government turning down another independence referendum, not granting a Section 30 order, because they would go ahead with a reckless, illegal wildcat referendum. That's the threat that's facing voters here in Scotland right now.
OK. Who was the Prime Minister put in charge of the fight to save the Union in Number 10? Do you know?
So the Prime Minister leads a cabinet subcommittee with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the Secretaries of State of the three territorial offices.
OK. I simply ask because it's not altogether clear, apart from sort of a rambling committee, who's actually drawing up the master plan. Do you know?
I don't think that's a rambling committee that's got the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, senior government ministers and the Scottish Secretary, the Welsh Secretary and the Northern Irish Secretary. I think that's a very powerful committee that is absolutely supporting our efforts here in Scotland to make sure we stop that SNP majority and get a Parliament that is laser focused on the next 5 years on the issues that people in Scotland want us to be discussing.
OK. It's just that Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, told us that last weekend, in fact, that Number 10's devolution unit was impossible to work with, as every time he'd ring up someone in Number 10 to ask for something, he'd discover they'd been moved on and left their job. You're confident, are you, that the Number 10 union machine is now working as it should be, are you?
Yes, I think a committee led by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the two highest offices in the land, with our Scottish Secretary and other Secretaries of State, is a powerful committee. And certainly this is something I have discussed when I've met the Prime Minister face-to-face when I've been in London or had discussions in recent weeks and months with him. It's absolutely vital for the Union of the United Kingdom that Scotland continues to play a strong, integral part in that union, because we know the UK benefits from Scotland being within it and Scotland benefits from being inside that UK union as well.
What were your discussions with the Prime Minister? That he needs to up his game, need to get some semblance of order going? What did you ask him for?
Well, it's just to continue to promote what we are doing here in Scotland and the benefits of the United Kingdom and decisions taken by his government. For example, the furlough scheme and the self-employed income support that protected at the peak of this pandemic more than 1 million jobs in Scotland, or the fact that 2.8 million people have now had at least one dose of the vaccine here in Scotland is because of the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom.
What do you think about the story on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph this morning, which we're learned to be there's some sort of new idea, new thinking on the government on saving the union by spending billions more on Scots, presumably upping the already rather generous funding settlement of £2,000 a head more per taxpayer than English taxpayers get?
Well, as you say, the UK government is already investing considerably in Scotland. We know there was an additional £13.3 billion of support to help us get through this pandemic. And we know that the levelling up plans and the union connectivity review are all designed to ensure we have investment in all parts of the United Kingdom. And again, it shows how Scotland benefits from being part of that powerful economic union of the United Kingdom, and how all that would be put at risk with the SNP plans, because they can't tell us what currency we would have. They can't tell us detail on the border between Scotland and England. Scotland's biggest market is the rest of the United Kingdom. All these issues remain unanswered, yet Nicola Sturgeon is asking people to support her this week to go through another divisive independence referendum with no answers to the key questions.
And how's that going to go down with English taxpayers? That the answer to saving the union is not some new strategy by Boris Johnson, but bunging Scottish voters yet more of their own taxpayers' money?
Well, I think people across the United Kingdom have seen the benefits of UK government investment. If it's a furlough scheme, it's protected jobs in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. The VAT cut for hospitality and tourism has benefited businesses in the south of England and in the Shetland Isles. This shows how the Union of the United Kingdom supports businesses, individuals and communities across our four nations.
Let's move on to your leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Do you agree, as he has put it this week, that the questions facing him about his flat redecoration and who paid for it are, to quote him, a farrago of nonsense?
Well, I think, I understand there's now 3 separate investigations. They've been set up. They will look at the questions that have been raised and seek to get answers and resolution to this. But for me, I'm hearing that people in Scotland are actually more concerned about our growing attainment gap here in Scotland. The fact that, our educational standards have plummeted. The fact that here in Scotland, the SNP have built hospitals that can't take any patients. That's
I understand that, Douglas Ross. I
raising with me.
didn't ask you about the SNP's record on hospitals. I was asking about
No, but you were
Prime
asking,
Minister. So,
and I answered you about the Prime Minister.
but
I
my question was, I beg your pardon, my question was, do you agree with him or not that these accusations about his flat are a farrago of nonsense, or do you think there are some legitimate questions for him to answer?
Well, there are questions that will be answered, I'm sure, in the 3 separate investigations that have been set up.
I think that's can I take that as a yes? You think
Yes,
there are? Because
you can take anything as a yes, Tom. You're very persuasive.
Well, thank you. Let me ask you about this then, because you've also said this morning that you believe the Prime Minister should resign if he's found to have broken the ministerial code, for example, by misleading Parliament at the dispatch box. The thing about that is that the Prime Minister remains the arbiter of who has or hasn't broken the ministerial code. So it's kind of likely he's not going to force himself to resign. Do you think, because you're an MP in Westminster as well as the leader of the Scottish Tories, do you think surely it's time to have a truly independent advisor on ministerial standards who can launch his own investigations and whose findings must be respected, not overruled at a prime ministerial whim?
Well, first of all, Tom, I was asked a straight question and I gave a straight answer. I was asked if the Prime Minister, or indeed the question was put, the First Minister here in Scotland, have breached the ministerial code, should they resign? And I said if, and it's a big if, they are found guilty of breaching the ministerial code, then I don't believe they can continue, because they are in the highest office here in Scotland, in the UK level, and indeed across the United Kingdom. We need the highest standards within that office. In terms of looking at a future system going forward, there may be merit in that, but we also have to remember there is a standards committee within the UK Parliament that can look into these issues as well. And recently, new rules and powers for the standards committee have also gone through the UK Parliament, and I think we've got to look at all the various measures there are to ensure that there is full transparency and honesty from both members of the government and indeed every single one of the 650 MPs in the country.
You resigned as a minister in the Scottish office, member of the British government, famously last May, because you said you just could not personally defend Dominic Cummings' actions during the lockdown, the famous Barnard Castle eye test. After the very public attacks that Dominic Cummings has made on the Prime Minister, I think you're probably quite chuffed you called that one right, aren't you? And you got Dominic Cummings correct when some of your ministerial colleagues might not have.
Well, others will decide that, but I think people know my position on Dominic Cummings, what he says and what he does, and in the incident that you refer to, I simply couldn't believe or support what he did when many others were living under the tightest of restrictions, and particularly trying to say that he was testing his eyesight when he drove to Barnard Castle, I thought was absolute rubbish, and that's why I couldn't defend it as a government minister, and I took a difficult and hard decision to resign from office, but it's one I felt was right at the time, and I still believe it's right almost a year later.
What do you think of his very public attacks on the Prime Minister now, bang in the middle of what's a really, really important election campaign for you?
Again, I've made my views on Dominic Cummings clear. I did it 12 months ago. My views haven't changed, but I'm more focused on what I can do here in Scotland over the next 4 days.
All right. One final thing. For English voters this week, because they may not have heard this, you did feel a quite an interesting need to quote whole chunks of an Atomic Kitten song to a TV camera in the middle of an interview. Why was that?
Because it is the greatest song ever. It's my karaoke song. We'd had a little discussion about another leader, Anna Sauer, who you were speaking to earlier, who'd done a dance, and I just made it very clear I'm not just a dancer, then I can also sing. Oh, here we go.
Here we go. So, indeed, that was in response to Anna Sauer having some pretty slick dance moves.
But that's not the right song you're playing in
No,
the
we're
background
not.
there.
No, this is...
gosh, you worried me that you actually thought that was Atomic Kitten Hole again.
This song, as you can hear, is True Blue. We thought you might enjoy that one, and we're wondering...
I like that as well.
Do you think you could beat Anna Sauer in a dance-off?
I believe I could, yes, because I thought, despite a good effort, he was slightly out of step with some of his moves.
Oh,
It's all getting very dirty down here in the Scottish Parliament.
It really is, and
now, so.
Gloria is interpreting that very much as fighting talk.
I was just going to say, Douglas is right, that Whole Again by Atomic Kitten is possibly the best pop song ever made.
Finally, I found the second person that really likes Atomic Kitten Hole again, so I'm really pleased. That's made my Sunday.
I think that all of us can be quite glad that this is radio rather than television and there's no cameras at the moment to show any of our dancing moves. But Douglas Ross, leader of the Scottish Conservatives, thank you for joining us on G&T this morning.
Thank you.